Hey everybody, welcome back to Record-ology. Your first thought, based on the thumbnail, may be like, wow, this guy totally ripped off Via Westlife. Kind of, I guess. His idea was so fantastic that I'm like, we need to do this for record players. And I don't want to do a dummies thing because he already did that. That would be ripping him off. However, there was another Idiot's Guide book that was very similar, so I decided to kind of go with that theme. Anyway, the concept is really good, and we've touched on it before, but I thought we would package it in a little bit different way. So today's show is designed for the beginner, and we are going to take a look at some of the things that you want to look at when getting into record players. And I wanted to include sort of a guide for what to look for when you're in a store thinking about buying a record player. Anyway, this ought to be a lot of fun, guys. You're not going to want to miss this. Welcome to Record-ology! Okay guys, let me be the first to welcome you to record players, turntables, vinyl, all that good stuff. If you're brand new to this hobby, welcome. By the way, you found a very friendly place for beginners. Go ahead and hit subscribe if you haven't done so already. Check out our playlist on all kinds of beginner stuff. This whole channel is designed for people that are just getting into this stuff. So you're going to find a lot of cool stuff. This show specifically, though, is really a great place to start because we're going to look at a couple different paths you can take and what to look for on each of those paths. On the right, we have all-in-one units, suitcase players, things by Victrola and Crosley that look like this, that have this sort of form factor, or suitcase players. All of that is represented by this on the right. On the left, we have more traditional turntables. So the first thing you need to decide is which path do you want to go? And watch this video and you can kind of decide, because I'll talk about sort of the pitfalls of each and the benefits of each as well. But let's start there. To begin with, I'm going to go down the retro path on the right, and we'll take a look at what to look for, what the limitations are, and what the benefits are of a retro, modern record player, suitcase, turntable thingy. And let me preface this by saying there's absolutely nothing wrong with all-in-one units, suitcase players. They don't damage your vinyl. That's the #1 misnomer. They do not damage your vinyl. They may wear it a little bit faster, and I'll explain why, but it's not doing damage. Okay, so if you want to go down this suitcase player / all-in-one wooden retro kind of hip style that's very prevalent today, here's what to look for, and here are the benefits, and here are the detractors. The benefits are you get a lot of features in these all-in-ones. You get a tape player in the side, CD player, often they have Bluetooth. They have all kinds of cool features, and they have everything you need in one device. So you don't need a bunch of equipment. So if you don't have a stereo system and you don't want to bulk up your space with all that equipment, these are a great solution because they have everything you need literally all in one, hence the name all-in-one. Plus they look fantastic, and having something that looks cool, it's important, the looks, the aesthetic, the design, that's part of it. This is all about a tactile, involved media experience where you're experiencing physical media. A lot of people for the first time, because they grew up with streaming media, have never owned a record or a tape. So this is kind of a great place to start. And people that, you know, are negative about these, like I said, usually are negative based on false information. They usually say, well, it destroys your vinyl. Completely false. Does not destroy your vinyl. What it does do is it wears it down a little bit faster because it's cheaper and the parts are not made to the highest specification, but they're functional. Also, I would say that turntables, record players in this category are record players. Same thing with the suitcase players. These are record players. The other category that we're going to look at, those are turntables. And the differentiation oftentimes for me is a record player has built-in speakers where a turntable does not. Now there are exceptions to that, but that's kind of how I go about it. I'm not going to review this unit or talk about any specifics regarding the feature set of this product because we reviewed this in so many, dozens, if not hundreds of record players, which you can check out a playlist about that as well. I really want to talk about what to look for. If you're buying one of these, the first thing I would say is don't worry about the brand name. you will see that this one says Encore. You will also see Crosley, Victrola, many other brand names, some of which sound familiar, some of which don't. The names really don't matter because these are often sourced from the same Chinese companies. For instance, a lot of the Audio-Technica, Crosley, Victrola, turntables, and record players are made by the same company. So the brand name really doesn't matter. If you're buying one of these new, just be advised they make them in such bulk quantities that it's fairly common to get one with a defect or with a problem, something that you need to get it replaced. So it may take taking it back to the store 1 or 2 times to get a good one. And that may sound ridiculous, but that's the trade-off that you have to deal with these types of units. It's just a matter of fact. Once you get over that, and it doesn't really cost you anything other than time and annoyance to deal with that, but if you have to take yours back because it's acting wonky, then, do so. Hold on to your receipts if you're buying new. Hold on to your receipts. Remember where you got it from. If you're buying it as a gift, give them a gift receipt. That would be highly recommended. So if you talk about CD player, Bluetooth, the radio features, that's all fine. The cassette tapes are a lower quality. This one is a single direction motor, so one button either gives you eject or fast forward. If you want to rewind, you have to flip the tape over. There's no Dolby noise reduction. They don't license that technology anymore. So this is a very basic tape player. If you want to get a high quality cassette player, you really have to look at a 1990s era major brand unit like Sanyo, Sony, Panasonic, Onkyo, and others. These are going to be very basic but functional. One commonality between the wooden all-in-one units and suitcase players is this very typical mechanism. Sometimes they have a larger platter like this, sometimes the platter is smaller. It's functional, but it's not the highest quality type of mechanism, and it doesn't yield true high-end audio that records can potentially offer you. So if you're in this for audio quality, you're never going to realize that full potential with an all-in-one or a suitcase player, even if you connect it to higher-end speakers, which you can do. You're kind of stuck in this lower-end sound quality. It's not terrible, but it's definitely lower than the regular turntables that we'll look at in a little bit. One of the most noticeable ways to identify this type of mechanism is with this little red tip down here. And let me explain kind of what that is and why it matters. A record player has 2 major functions: to spin the record and then to get sound off of the record. The way it gets sound off of the record, and arguably the most important piece in the entire process, is this guy right here. This is called a cartridge. Now, lower end units, all-in-one unit suitcase players use this common red tip variant. This is a very cheap, and we're talking probably cost less than 10 cents to make, and you can buy them for, just a handful of dollars. Ceramic cartridge. And a ceramic cartridge is chosen for these because it does not require much amplification. It outputs a line level signal. Therefore, you can plug the unit directly into powered speakers, a stereo system, albeit with limited sound quality, or it can be easily amplified for its built-in speakers. That's why the manufacturers choose them. It works by bending a ceramic rod, which converts the mechanical groove information into electrical sound impulses. But again, be advised that a ceramic cartridge, although there's nothing wrong with it and it will not damage your records, has a limited potential of sound quality. The biggest argument against these types of players is that they allegedly damage your records. So when you play a record, the tone arm, which is this piece, and we've done videos, I'm not going to go into it, on all the components, how a record player works, how to play a record. Definitely check those out. But in essence, you have this resting on the record, and the argument is that it's too heavy. It puts too much weight on the record, and that the tip carves up or damages your records. It is true that these track or weigh more than a higher end unit. So your records do indeed wear out faster. However, it's not damage. It's just a higher level of wear. People enjoy records on these types of units for years and years and years with no problems whatsoever. But if you got out the microscope and looked at the record versus a higher end unit, you would notice that it's wearing out faster. So now let's talk about what to look for if you're buying one of these used. There are 2 major things. One is going to be the stylus. Now, Oftentimes these ship with a ruby stylus, and a ruby stylus is literally made of ruby or sapphire. It's pretty much the same stone. Or if it's a little bit higher end, it may have a diamond stylus. There's no sound quality difference between a ruby or a diamond. It's just that a diamond is going to last longer. Whereas a ruby can play around 100 records allegedly, although I think it's probably quite a bit higher than that. A diamond can play over 1,000 records before it needs to get changed. Once these are replaced, especially if you have a diamond, you can go probably 1 to 2 years with average use before you need to replace that. But it's important to understand what this looks like down here, so I'm going to demonstrate that. And I want to point this out too. If you're buying a used record player or turntable, it's highly recommended to replace a stylus because you don't know if it was mishandled, how worn down it is, any of that information. If you want to learn how to replace the stylus, we've got a video about that as well. But I wanted to show sort of close up what this looks like. So the plastic housing is literally just a plastic housing. The stylus is the piece in the middle. You'll notice the little rubber thing there. That's a rubber boot. And the little metal arm, that's called a cantilever. And at the edge of that, or the tip of that, is the stylus itself. And it may not come across, but this is probably a ruby or sapphire. It's hard to tell. They actually have a kind of a red tint. That's how you can tell. But this is easily replaceable, and you can buy these for cheap, like a 3-pack for less than 10 bucks on Amazon or eBay. And be careful too, because a lot of times they'll advertise them as diamond when they're really ruby. So getting an actual diamond one can be tricky. Also, something I didn't mention in my video about replacing these, they just hinge off, by the way, and snap back on. It's pretty easy. Is that there's different sizes. The Victrola units have a different size tip than the Crosleys and some of the others. That is the first thing to look for when you're going to buy a record player. Make sure if it's used that this is on straight. Sometimes these have a tendency to twist. That's going to impact the sound quality. The other thing is if it's being sold as not working, sometimes it's a very simple fix because sometimes people don't want to deal with even the most basic issues, or they just simply don't know. So sometimes if you get a record player from a thrift store or buy it used from somebody and it's not working for whatever reason, it could be as simple as making sure that the belt is on, because sometimes they fall off. Let me show you how to do that. So all-in-one record players, it's pretty common for them to have, like I said, a standard mechanism. And the turntable platter, which is this piece right here, the platter, will not come off because if it's being carried or moved, they don't want it falling off. So it's pretty common for there to be a little metal clip, and I'm going to zoom in there so you can see a little bit better what I'm dealing with. It's a little metal ring that goes around this center shaft. And there's a little gap back here. So you need to take this off by finding the leverage. See, there's the opening right there. So we need to put a screwdriver in. Now be very careful because these have a tendency of jumping across the room. But just pull it back. They're a lot easier to get off than they are to put on. And we can leave it there for right now. Then you can simply lift the platter off. It's as simple as that. Now you'll see that the belt is just laying there. If you pull these off, they're going to fall off anyway. But a lot of times they were in the off position or they had fallen previously, which would make the record player not operate. It wouldn't spin. So sometimes all you have to do is put the belt back on and everything will work fine because people don't realize that the belt has simply fallen off. In all of my years doing this, I have not ever seen a suitcase or an all-in-one player belt break. And by the way, never use a rubber band. It seems like it is rubber, it is a band, and that would perhaps work for a short period of time, but these are not as stretchy, and especially with cassette player mechanisms, the rubber bands just simply don't work. But these record players as well, you need a real belt. I have never had to order a new belt for one of these types of players, but they do fall off sometimes. So you're like, great, how do I put it back on? So if you turn the platter upside down, there's this lip here. This is called a sub platter, and that's literally where the belt goes. So put the belt on, make sure it's flat. You don't want it rolled over on itself. Now this is actually a tricky thing to do on these types of players. So flip it back over once you got the belt on. Then you have to take your finger like this. Now you can take a ribbon or some sort of contraption you've rigged up to help with this. But essentially you need to put it over the spindle back here, which is really hard to film while doing it. So bear with me here for a minute. You need to put it over the spindle and then gently lower the platter back on while not having the belt fall off. And that is much easier said than done. So I've got the belt around the spindle and eyeing it very closely. I am placing the platter back on. You may need to do that a couple of times to get it to work. You'll need a tool, unless you have incredibly strong hands, to put it back on, and a lot of patience. There's a little cutout at the bottom of the spindle, a little place for it to slide in. It's very difficult to do sometimes. This can take 20 minutes to get it right. That's why I avoid having to take these off unless absolutely necessary. So once you get in place, position it with your fingers and then give it a good push from the back of it, and it'll pop on. Sometimes you'll get a nice satisfying click, sometimes not, like this one. And there it is, back in position. So that's pretty much it when it comes to all-in-one and wooden units, what to look for when buying new, what to look for when buying used. Now let's look at turntables. So if your main goal in all of this is getting the best sound quality off of your records, and that's more important to you than style or retro goodness, as it were, then a typical turntable may be the right choice for you. Now, you might think, well, turntables are more expensive than those record player novelty units. Sometimes not. Some of those all-in-one wooden units can cost double what a good entry-level record player can cost. I mean, we're talking, those can go up to $200–300 for those wooden all-in-ones with the lower quality, whereas an entry-level good turntable can cost a lot less. This is a Marley stirred-up first generation. It's kind of a unique design, and there are design element differences between them, but in general they have, you know, again, a lot of the same features and things to look out for. This one also films really well, which is why I chose it. So again, if you're looking for sound quality, this is the way to go. Be very careful though, because there are some sneaky business practices you'll see out there where you see a record player, a turntable that looks like this, but still has that cheap plastic mechanism. And it may even still have that cheap, you know, ceramic cartridge, but it looks like this. So don't be fooled. They are out there. There are those that look like a higher end unit, but don't. You know, they're trying to create this perceived value that just doesn't exist. You won't get any better sound quality if you have that ceramic cartridge on one of these than you will on one of those. Again, it's not bad. It just is what it is. It just is what it is. So on a higher end turntable, typically you're not going to have any speakers. So you're going to need to connect it to a set of powered speakers or a stereo system. Also, there's something called a preamp, which we've discussed, but I'm going to go into a little bit of detail here. Because this is sound quality based, the cartridge is key. There's a lot of different variants and types, but the main type of technology, unlike ceramic, is called moving magnetic. So basically, there are moving magnets that differentiate their position between themselves and a static coil, and that's what it uses to translate those grooves into sound. It's a little bit different. It's still a transducer. It's still the same basic premise, but it does it in a little bit different way. It generates a lower voltage than a ceramic, so it requires a little preamplifier to get it up to line level. So some of these will have a built-in preamp, and you can switch that in the back. Some of the higher end units don't have a built-in preamp, so you need to buy a preamp to up the level of voltage coming out of this to a line level signal that powered speakers or a stereo system can get. If this is very intimidating to you, I apologize. Don't be freaked out. We go into a lot more detail on what all that stuff means in other videos. This is like super high level. Another thing to be aware of is the speed. So typically those all-in-one units and wooden units are 3 speeds, so they can play 78s, 33s, 45s. Regular turntables often are 2 speed. Now, why is that? It's kind of an interesting thing because a 78 RPM record is not going to offer you the best fidelity, and you need a special stylus in order to get the best sound quality off of it. I maintain that it doesn't do any damage playing it with a regular stylus, which is thinner, but you're not going to get that full groove information out of it by using a stylus that's too narrow. So if you have a turntable that spins at 78 RPM, even those all-in-one units with the ceramic cartridge, just upgrade the cartridge or stylus to one that'll handle that wide groove and you're good to go. But be aware that it's pretty common for a turntable, especially on the mid to entry level, to only have 2 speeds. Some of them have 3 speeds, but not all. Probably the biggest question I get from people that buy or are thinking about buying a turntable versus a record player is, does it have built-in speakers, or I can't hear any sound? Again, be advised, these require speakers. You have to plug in speakers. They do not have them built in. So there is an output on the back to connect it to a set of powered or preamplified speakers, or you can connect it to a stereo system input, depending on what you have. But be advised, This requires an additional investment. If you buy a turntable that has built-in speakers, chances are it's probably a very lower end one that's not going to sound that good. And again, there's the preamp circuit. This one also has USB, and that's a feature that I'm seeing a lot on both turntables and record players these days. So if you want to rip or record your vinyl to digital, you can do so with some free software called Audacity. Often comes with these units, or if you're buying a used one, you can just download it for free online. And the power supply as well. Now there are grouchy, downright mean audiophile people out there that discourage kids and newcomers to this hobby, especially on those all-in-one units and suitcase player units, try to scare them off of it, etc., etc. I really, really disagree with that. I think that we should welcome everybody in, as I have welcomed you if you are new. Again, very welcome. By the way, Record-ology is a completely safe place for new people. Absolutely. We're experiencing this together. But one argument that an audiophile can make about all-in-ones, retro units, suitcase players, etc., etc., is that they do not give vinyl its due justice in terms of demonstrating its potential. So it is feasible that a newcomer would get a suitcase player or an all-in-one, put their brand new copy of Dark Side of the Moon on there, hook it up and say, this is it. I'm going to experience vinyl. I've heard it sounds better than CDs. I've heard it sounds better than streaming, everything. I want to experience this. And then what they hear is a substandard thing, and they say, oh, records suck, and they throw the whole thing out the door. That right there is the one valid argument that they have. So if you want to avoid that experience, and you want more than the novelty aspect that those devices offer, a true turntable is the way to go, because you will be amazed at the sound quality. Some decent speakers, decent stereo system, put a record on, it is amazing. It is an audio treat for your ears that you have likely not experienced it. And from a scientific standpoint, as I've demonstrated before, CDs are far superior sound quality wise than a vinyl record. However, there's something between the lines. There's something sub-auditory outside of the range of actual hearing. You feel it. It's a different experience. Okay, so let's talk about what to look for if you're buying a used turntable. The biggest thing is the cartridge. Make sure it's one that you like, a brand that you like. Different brands have different sound characteristics. Again, plan to replace the needle, the stylus itself. Another thing to keep a lookout for is that the counterbalance is there. I've seen a lot of these for sale places where it's just missing. And if you don't know what to look for, you may be like, oh, it's great. That will ruin your life. So make sure that the counterbalance is there. Again, we've demonstrated how to set that before. It's fairly common you won't see a 45 adapter. Sometimes they ship with these ultra cheap. This is the cheapest of the cheap of the cheap. You know, you buy a $200 record player, you expect to get something that costs more than 1/10 of a cent to make. So upgrading to a better 45 adapter, a metal one, is recommended. You will need to keep an eye out for the same belt problem. When I bought my Target Heyday turntable, which by the way is a fantastic turntable, I'm pretty sure the person donated it to the thrift store because they thought it had stopped working. And I pulled it off and it was just the belt had fallen off. It wasn't even broken. Now these turntables have these openings that allow you to access that belt and spindle much easier. So you can get to the underside a lot better. There is the belt. It's the same basic premise. So you need to put the belt on the sub platter, and then using that, you know, you can guide it back into position. It's pretty easy. Again, make sure it's not folded over. Try not to go into full education mode here. I'm just trying to keep it basic, but it can be as simple as that. So make sure that the belt, if it's not working, check the belt. Now there can be issues. I mean, there can be a record player with a fault. I mean, that is a thing, but this is something to keep in mind. You can get a killer deal if it's as simple as that. Again, belts on these, I can't think of the last time I've broken a belt, and I have gone through a lot of record players. So it can happen, and they are easily replaceable. But again, it's not something that's happened. Most of the time, they just fall off, and the person thinks that they're broken. Besides that, it's really a matter of preference. The finish, the style. There are variances, even at a audio grade performing quality turntable. there are design aesthetic changes. Obviously, this one is a bamboo finish. There's, piano black. There's white units. There's all different styles. But those are the big things to keep an eye on. One thing I will say from a quick quality check standpoint is if you can shake this piece back here and it's very loose or plasticky, because they will sneak in cheap plastic parts even on higher end units. If this has a lot of give to it, then that's kind of an indicator that it's not the highest quality. This is kind of important because this pivot kind of controls how smooth and gentle the whole operation is. It's not a deal breaker if it's really loose and janky, but that's one of the things I look for. Check the stylus, check this, and I check that belt. Those are the most important things when buying a used turntable or even a new one. One final recommendation, and this applies to both turntables and record players, any unit you find out there, and that is having a tone arm lift. This is huge because if you're like me, you have shaky fingers, you're relegated to carrying the entire operation in your shaky fingers as you're trying to gently lower that, and you don't want to have shaky fingers in that environment. So if you have a unit with one of these little lift levers, it's great because it lifts it up, you spin it over the record, and then it gently descends. I'm not going to let it go all the way down because there's no record on there, but that is a huge thing. Also, this one is completely backwards. Almost every other one will lift back and release down. This one is the opposite. It lifts towards the front, and it's backwards is what I'm trying to say. Make sure you keep this clip in position. When you have it in storage, when you have it in shipping, make sure you put a stylus guard on there. If yours doesn't come with one, it's not a huge deal, but I wouldn't go buy one. Just be careful. Just be careful. Also, many times I get questions and comments about people that have no sound when they're playing the records. Make sure you take the stylus guard off of there. It's usually a white plastic piece, but your record will not play if that is in position. And now a pro tip. If your record player is skipping and you're having a lot of problems with it, the needle jumping around, this happens a lot, especially on the entry level. Make sure that this little shelf piece is pushed down. You can just gently push it down. On the cheap ones, it's just a piece of plastic. This one has some of the rubber on there. But what happens is when you flip this lever into the down position, it's relying on this to kind of fall down on its own. And there's some damping fluid in there to make sure it's smooth, which does dry out and wear out, but you can replace that. But what happens oftentimes is this stays up too high, and therefore it's like holding up the stylus off the record still just a little bit too high, causing it to skip. So just push down on this to make sure it's fully descended and out of the way. That fixes about 95% of skipping record issues. So now's the fun part. It's time to choose. Do you want to go retro or do you want to go functional? I guess that's probably the best way to say about that. Another major category that people will mention unfailably is modern versus vintage, which is different than retro. Retro meaning it's designed to look old, have a cool vintage look to it, but is not truly vintage, whereas an actual vintage turntable is typically a functional, high-fidelity, audio quality-based unit that was made, in the 60s or 70s. There's a lot of argument about that. Whether or not you go new or you go old/vintage when it comes to actual turntables, those same principles we discussed apply across the board. Absolutely. And I want to encourage you, if this is more attractive to you, suitcase players, that's totally fine. A lot of people that start actually eventually go to a higher end unit. So it's a great place to start. This is great for kids. This is great for people just getting into it. This is also a great way to test and see if you like it, especially if you get a really killer deal on one of these types of units or a suitcase player. If you want to kind of experience physical media, that's the way to go. But be advised, the sound quality is going to be limited. So it's kind of an entry or a gateway. I hate using that term gateway, but it's an entry point, as it were, into the hobby. Or if you want to skip this and go straight into high fidelity audio, there's a multitude of choices. And on that note, we have a multitude of videos reviewing these record players and many, and I mean dozens, if not hundreds of others. Check out our reviews and unboxing playlist for that information. If you want to learn more about how to set up, operate a turntable, how a record's laid out, all the fun basic stuff, check out our basics playlist. Okay guys, and that is going to do it. I hope you enjoyed this show. It was a lot of fun putting this together. Hope you're having a wonderful weekend. I can't believe it's almost over, but we're going to have a great week too, for sure. Got a lot of fun content coming your way. Also, if you haven't done so already, check out my wife's channel, Beyond the Purple Suitcase. We went and toured a castle that was built by hand, and this is a massive castle right here in Colorado. So if you want to find out, see all about that adventure, check out her video from yesterday. That's Beyond the Purple Suitcase. Go over there and hit subscribe. Anyway, that's going to do it for today, guys. Happy record hunting. We'll see you next time.